Good afternoon. We're going to get started fairly quickly so that we can get to our guests. First off, the World Food Programme and UNICEF warned today that Gaza faces the grave risk of famine as food consumption and nutrition indicators have reached their worst levels since the conflict began. That's according to data shared in the latest Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Alert. The IPC alert highlights that 2 out of the 3 famine thresholds have now been breached in parts of the territory. Ross Smith, WFP Director of Emergencies, and Jean-Martin Bauer, WFP Director of Food Security and Nutrition Assessments, will brief you virtually on the IPC report on Gaza, and that will be right after I'm done with my part. In relation to the IPC report, the Secretary-General said the following. The latest Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Alert confirms what we have feared. Gaza is on the brink of famine. The facts are in, and they are undeniable. Palestinians in Gaza are enduring a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. This is not a warning. It is a reality unfolding before our eyes. The trickle of aid must become an ocean. Food, water, medicine, and fuel must flow in waves and without obstruction. This nightmare must end. Ending this worst-case scenario will take the best efforts of all parties now. We need an immediate and permanent humanitarian ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and full, unfettered humanitarian access across Gaza. This is a test of our shared humanity, a test we cannot afford to fail. And again, that's the words of the Secretary-General. Turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns that we are making the most of the steps announced by the Israeli authorities to ease the delivery of aid into and across Gaza. We're collecting more supplies at the crossings and bringing more in from outside to restock. Our colleagues on the ground say that the Israeli declared tactical pauses have reduced the intensity of hostilities, but not significantly enough in times and areas where these are meant to apply. On Sunday and Monday, the first 2 days of the pauses, the UN and our partners were able to bring into Gaza more food, mainly wheat flour, alongside ready-to-use infant formula, high-energy biscuits, diapers, vaccines, and much-needed fuel. But OCHA says the volume of goods coming in is still far from enough. Our colleagues say that most aid is still being offloaded by crowds before reaching where it's supposed to go. But market monitoring shows prices for basic goods are starting to drop, which could point to better operating conditions if aid flows further increase and supplies saturate the area. OCHA reminds us that commercial imports need to resume sooner rather than later. No humanitarian operation can fully support 2.1 million people on its own. And for people to feel reassured that aid is flowing regularly, tactical pauses won't cut it. What's desperately needed is a full, permanent ceasefire. Meanwhile, throughout most of the Gaza Strip, the UN and our partners are still required to coordinate humanitarian movements with the Israeli authorities. We're seeing fewer outright denials by the Israeli authorities, but teams are still facing impediments on the ground. Yesterday, all attempts were initially approved, but only half of them were fully facilitated. That's 5 out of 10. This facilitation allowed our teams to collect cargo from Kerem Shalom and Zakim, the only crossings currently available to us, alongside other critical operations. The remaining 5 movements faced impediments on the ground. 2 of them could nevertheless be accomplished, and 3 could not be accomplished fully or at all. Our colleagues from the World Health Organization say that they remain committed to staying and delivering in Gaza, despite the destruction of their main warehouse and damage to staff residences this last week. WHO calls for the release of their detained colleague, and they reiterated their call for protection of healthcare and sustained entry of food, fuel, and health aid at scale through all possible routes. You will have seen that Lebanon's permanent military court found guilty 6 of the individuals charged in the killing of Irish peacekeeper Private Sean Rooney in Al-Aqbiyah on December 2022. 1 individual was acquitted. I can tell you that we joined the UN interim force in Lebanon in welcoming the conclusion of this trial process and the government of Lebanon's commitment to bring the perpetrators to justice. Since the attack, UNIFIL has extended its full support, both to Lebanese and Irish authorities with their respective judicial proceedings. Once again, we offer our deepest condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Private Rooney and the Government of Ireland. The Deputy Secretary-General continued her engagement at the second UN Food System Summit stock-taking moment taking place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Today, she participated in high-level events with public and private stakeholders, focusing on the role of African women and youth entrepreneurs in food systems transformation, as well as the challenge of improving food systems in complex settings. She also met with Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, the chairperson of the African Union Commission. They discussed advancing the UN 2030 Agenda and the AU Agenda 2063, as well as accelerating food systems transformation on the continent. They also addressed the interlinkages between climate, peace, and security in Africa. This evening, the Deputy Secretary-General will travel to Amman, Jordan, to co-chair the regional retreat with the UN resident coordinators in the Arab States region. This morning, the head of our Peace Operations Department, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, briefed the Security Council in a session on adapting peace operations for the pursuit of political solutions. He said peacekeeping operations have proven to be critical instruments in advancing peace processes and supporting lasting political solutions. But for these operations to be effective in their efforts to pursue political solutions, Mr. Lacroix highlighted three critical areas where we should optimize collective leverage. First and foremost, he said, the role of this council is indispensable not only by mandating missions, but by ensuring that mission political strategies receive sustained political support on the ground. Second, Mr. Lacroix said it is vital that UN missions and leadership act as constant and unwavering ambassadors for peace. And third, it is equally important for our efforts to be closely coordinated and aligned with regional and sub-regional actors, whose political leverage and proximity to crises can be decisive in shaping positive political outcomes. Martha Poby, the Assistant Secretary-General for Africa at the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, also briefed the Council. She said that in light of the challenges facing peace operations, there's a clear need to reflect on their future, adding that the review on the future of all forms of UN peace operations is a chance for reflection, self-awareness, and honesty. Their remarks were shared with you. Turning to Guatemala, our colleagues at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us that $4 million has been allocated from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund ahead of the upcoming drought forecasted during the crop season, running from September to November. This marks the first time funds have been released from the SURF before a disaster in Latin America and the Caribbean region, as part of what we call anticipatory action efforts, so that communities can be prepared ahead of a drought. Under the leadership of the UN Resident Coordinator, Miguel Barreto, the UN, the government, and our partners will use the funds to reach more than 50,000 people with cash, assistance in providing livestock, water, hygiene and sanitation services, food, and medical care. Our humanitarian colleagues noted that families in the Chiquimula department in southern Guatemala are already facing crisis levels of food insecurity due to previous droughts, economic shocks, and systemic poverty. OCHA is also closely monitoring the situation across the so-called dry corridor in Central America, which also includes Honduras and El Salvador, and is susceptible to droughts. In a statement we issued yesterday afternoon, the Secretary-General welcomed the ceasefire agreement between Cambodia and Thailand as a positive step towards ending current hostilities and easing tensions. He urged both countries to respect the agreement fully and to create an environment conducive to addressing long-standing issues and achieving lasting peace. The full statement is online. And last, I can tell you that the Secretary-General is saddened by the passing of Dr. David Nabarro, who had been the World Health Organization's special envoy dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. Dr. Nabarro was a tireless advocate for global health, a leader who brought clarity, compassion, and conviction to some of the world's most complex health emergencies, from AIDS and malaria to avian influenza and the COVID-19 pandemic. He dedicated his life to the conviction that health is a human right and worked to help make that right a reality for all people, everywhere. For Dr. Nabarro, a healthier world meant equitable access to vaccines, nutrition, and essential care, especially for the most vulnerable. The Secretary-General pays tribute to Dr. Nabarro's extraordinary legacy of service and reaffirms his commitment to advancing the principles he championed: solidarity, science, and health for all. So I'll take a few questions before we go to our guests. Yes, Yvonne.
Thank you, Farhan. With regard to the sentences handed down to those convicted of the killing of Private Sean Rooney, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin has expressed disappointment over the length of time this process has taken, the fact that the main culprit remains at large, and he's described the other sentences as far too lenient. Does the Secretary-General agree?
Well, we are not going to second-guess the position of national judicial bodies. Obviously, it's appropriate for the judicial bodies to handle the situation. From our standpoint, we will continue to respond to all requests for cooperation with the Irish authorities in connection with proceedings in Ireland in accordance with established procedures and we'll continue to follow the procedures in Lebanon. You'll have seen at the very least what we're hopeful for is that all of the relevant judicial bodies continue to pursue accountability in this case.
Okay, and on that, now that the legal process has been completed in Lebanon, will the UN be more willing to cooperate and give out further information to the family of Private Sean Rooney and the Irish government, which is something that they have said in the past the UN has failed to be forthcoming with?
We intend to be to respond to all of the requests for cooperation with the Irish authorities, and of course we've also been cooperating with authorities of Lebanon in their investigation, and we'll continue to do so. Sharife?
Thank you. Farhan, I want to ask you about Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's denial that there is starvation in Gaza and that children are dying from starvation. He says no such thing exists. Despite all the evidence that is now confirmed by the IPC report too, despite everything that each of us are seeing on the screens, the photos, the visuals, how do you evaluate Prime Minister Netanyahu's denial that there is starvation in Gaza? Thank you.
We've provided all the facts that are necessary to draw conclusions. We've been pointing to the massive amount of hunger, and you'll have seen the extremely sobering IPC report. I'll also, of course, let my guests speak at further length about this, but there can be no denial about the fact that immediate action is needed, and it is needed at a large scale to prevent further hunger and further starvation. Yes, Mike.
Following on that same note, the Secretary-General's statement today said the latest IPC alert confirms what we have feared. Gaza is on the brink of famine. The facts are in, and they are undeniable. You and I have had exchanges in the briefing room earlier about the IPC reports that had projected famine, were retroactively revised, were well off the mark, and at one point the IPC Review Committee pointed out in some IPC reports that the information, the data, was completely off the mark, was inaccurate, incomplete, to a point where that information needed to be revised as well. Why, based on all that and the projections that have been so far off the mark for so long, is the Secretary General so confident that this IPC alert has undeniable facts in it? What gives him that confidence?
It's confidence based on the fact that not only has the IPC report been cautiously going through the evidence for the last year and a half, and they've been looking at the evidence and revising whenever they've made mistakes. At this stage, the IPC report speaks for itself, that 2 of the 3 indicators have already been reached. And I'll let my guests talk further on this. But in addition to that, those findings are in line with what World Health Organization people on the ground are telling us about malnutrition cases. Those are in line with what we are seeing from our own personnel on the ground facing hunger. This is something that is undeniable and something that we ourselves, including our people on the ground and their families, are facing. It's something that has been growing for some time, and we are confident about the accuracy of this. And I'll let our guests speak to it more. Deji, and then Evelyn, and then we'll go to our guest.
Okay, 2 questions first. Any response from the Secretary-General on the UK's intent to recognize Palestine as a state?
Well, these are bilateral decisions, and of course, it's up to member governments to take their own decisions. As you know, Palestine is already an observer state at the UN, and we'll have to see what decisions other member states take. Beyond that, of course, you'll have heard what the Secretary-General himself said at the start of this conference on a 2-state solution, and I'd refer you back to what he said then.
Okay, second question. Yesterday, Israeli Ambassador Danon said that this international conference is a circus. Does the Secretary-General agree, and what does he think of the importance of this international conference, if not a circus?
I think the value of the conference was spoken to at length by the Secretary-General yesterday. And again, I'd refer you to what he said then. Evelyn?
Yes, could you repeat and elaborate the difficulties the UN trucks in Gaza had to deliver the goods they brought in?
Well, I mean, I've been saying this for some days, but I just refer you to what I said at the start of this briefing. the basic point is that we are getting better ability to bring in more food, formula, high-energy biscuits, diapers, vaccines, and others. But at this point, the amount is still not reliable enough that crowds are continuing to try to offload the goods as soon as they get in. And we need to make sure, just as happened earlier, that in addition to humanitarian aid, that commercial traffic gets restored so that the sense of panic that has been happening for these last weeks can finally be lifted.